Okay, it is the top of the hour, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, so we are going to get started here. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We have a great program, and we're excited for it, and we hope that you enjoy it as much as we hope you will. So, good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, 3 High Liability Issues with Student Transportation. During this webinar, our presenters will cover the following. The management issue, how management disconnect creates crimes and accidents. The training issue, how the lack of training of drivers violates the law and increases liability. And finally, transportation and special needs students. Today's presenters are Dale Yeager and Andy Demidont. Dale is the president and CEO of Seraph, a consulting and training firm. Seraph offers corporations, schools, colleges, hospitals, government agencies, municipalities, law firms, and individuals a wide array of programs to solve problems. Andy Demidont is retired from the public education system after more than 35 years of service. During Andy's tenure in public education, he held various positions, such as assistant principal, high school principal, and superintendent. He's also taught graduate courses at Mansfield State University. He's been nominated to serve on several statewide task forces in the state of Pennsylvania, and is on the a task force to restructure education in Pennsylvania as well. He's the recipient of numerous state and national awards. If you have a question that pertains to the presentation, please use the chat or Q&A feature, which is found on the right-hand side of the screen. Dale and Andy will do their best to answer your questions during the presentation. Approximately 1 hour after the event, we'll send out an email with a link to the archived recording of the webinar, and with it will include the PowerPoint presentation that is used during this event. We do ask that you take time to fill out the survey that will appear on your screen after the webinar is over. I now invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation. I'm now going to turn it over to our distinguished presenter, Dale Yeager. Dale, it's all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, Andy and I are going to be doing a webinar on liability issues related to transportation of students. And we're going to touch on issues that some of you may not know of. For example, today we have people who are listening who are attorneys who represent school districts. We also have attorneys who have litigation against school districts, and we'll be talking to both sides on this issue. Andy obviously will be giving you most of the detail because of his experience with being a school administrator and dealing with these issues for several decades. Andy and I together have over 26,000 public school clients in the U.S., and we see this issue as a critical issue that keeps increasing. And it's one of the areas of education management which has really not progressed with the times. Most school districts, and I think it's fair to say this, that most school districts are still running their transportation programs about 20 years behind in both training and management structure. And so we're going to address these issues, and we're going to give lots of time for all of you to ask questions because that's important as part of the learning process. So we're going to move forward. Why am I not moving here? I'm sorry. There we go. Number one, one of the things about this, it's a growing issue. Well, if you go to the U.S. Department of Justice or the U.S. Department of Education, you'll find that going back over 10 years, numerous research studies on this issue have been created and been performed. This is a very, very big issue that has not really been addressed. It's a lot of money has been thrown at it, but ultimately, down on the school district level, it is continuing to be a problem, and many of you know this on both sides of the issue. One of the things that is critically important to understand is that in the last year to 2 years, all of the states in the U.S. have modified or revised their laws regarding student safety. And the new catchphrase, if I can summarize all 50 of these laws, is portal to portal. Now, unlike in the past, you are responsible as a school district for the student safety from portal to portal. And one of the things that we find that's a very big problem, and I'm going to talk about this later, and Andy's going to expand on it, is the issue of school safety plans, and most school districts have them in all 50 states. Most school safety plans are not including in those school safety plans rigorous management of buses, of transportation vehicles. And this is really where the start of the problem is. There is a disconnect between the end of the school day and when the buses are either going away or in the morning when they are coming to. And ultimately, school safety and school management has to be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The buildings are always open and operational, even with secondary staff. And also with the issue of transportation, that extension of the school safety policy has to go into those transportation systems. Bullying and crime doesn't stop at the end of the school day. Increases in drivers committing crimes against students. All you have to do is go to Google News, put in bus driver, and start reading about some of the horrific crimes that have been committed just in the last year across the United States by drivers. Selling drugs, sexual assault of students. It's not just student-on-student aggression. A lot of the problems with drivers is that many school districts give out drivers' jobs to retired school employees, or school board members will give them out as favors. Nobody talks about this, but we're going to talk about this as professionals today. We're going to talk about some of the favoritism that creates liability issues. We also have drivers who are not really properly vetted by employees or by employers. We also have a problem, which we'll talk about later, where school districts are hiring vendor companies, outside transportation companies, to provide their transportation, but yet are not managing the drivers of these vehicles. And we'll talk about that also. Lastly, lawsuits are dramatically increasing related to transportation issues. And so those of you who are representing or in management positions in school districts, this is a critical issue that you're probably aware of and need to be really putting your effort and focus on, because it can create serious financial hardship for school systems. The management issue: driver, transportation, supervisor, principal, and staff. These are the four critical elements, the four critical groups of people that must be interconnected on a communications level. They have to be interconnected in policy and in communication on a daily basis. Many times we see a disconnect between drivers and transportation supervisors, and we see a very big disconnect between transportation supervisors and principals. Then principals to staff, for example, special education teachers, people who really need to be connecting with principals and giving them information on students, and then the principals passing on that information to the transportation supervisor is critically important. And so if there is any kind of disconnect in the management structure of these four groups of people, you are talking about high liability. And like I said in the beginning, transportation in schools has really not progressed along with other areas of education in our experience. And we have a pretty good, from a scientific perspective, we have a pretty good sampling considering how many schools we work with. Are there documented personnel supervision schedules for drop-off and pickup of students? This is critically important. Everyone out there who is in any kind of education management knows that the master calendar is key, and education, organizing the day is critically important. The problem we see a lot of times that creates a liability is the lack of documented schedules and specific schedules for specific students and specific routes. Andy will talk about that more in a minute. What is written and executed? What is the written and executed policies for daily effective communication? And we find many times that there is none. It's all done ad hoc. And when we ask why, they say, well, that's the way it's always been done. This, again, is a management problem. This is a management problem. Are drivers provided with critical student information for medical and special needs students? Again, a lot of times we find that that's done very ad hoc. It's just kind of mentioned. And this miscommunication can create serious issues for liability and create liability issues. Andy, do you want to talk about this management issue for just a moment?
Yes, I do. I want to talk about I'll take them piece by piece: driver, transportation supervisor, principal, staff. I would carry that on to a step further, in particular in a problem that is becoming increasingly more prevalent, and that is special needs students as they enroll in school systems. What is the process in place in the school district? What are the policies, procedures for me as a new student? I'm coming from District X, and I already have an IEP. I already have some substantiated behavioral problems and major issues. What's the process in place in that school district, especially if my IEP has a transportation provision built into it? What steps are in place at that local school district from the outset of my enrollment? Who's involved? I would add another critical element to the list that Dale has there: driver, transportation supervisor, principal, and staff. I would have the special ed director involved almost always in these types of situations, or if not, special ed director, because in many cases school districts have people that are assigned dual duties. A human resources person, a pupil personnel person may wind up being in that position. Somebody who has the authority. If I'm enrolled in that school and I come with a track record of pretty serious types of behavioral issues, and transportation is part of my IEP, is the school district going to be able to provide, for instance, an aide if necessary on the bus? So the person that's there on behalf of central office has to have the decision-making capacity in order to make sure that from day one, the overall safety of that bus, 60 kids on the bus, one of whom happens to be a serious behavioral problem, did I take reasonable and prudent steps to assure that that student can ride the bus safely and the other 59 students can as well? The other areas that I wanted to talk about are right from the route development itself. What's the process when the transportation director, does he or she develop the routes in isolation, or are they developed in a cooperative manner? The transportation supervisor working with principals and drivers to build the routes, to make sure that we have assured that our buses are traveling on the safest possible routes available to us. As far as the supervision is concerned, the thing that I would like to add, and it's particularly true at the high school level, most elementary schools and middle schools do a pretty good job of morning pickup, drop-off, and afternoon pickup of students at the buses. Where you see the problem is this mindset at the secondary level, the high school level, where the kids are old enough, I don't need to do that anymore. Nothing could be further from the truth. Do your high schools have supervised drop-off and pickup provisions for staff? Not only that, do they have follow-through procedures to make sure that if a crisis occurs, I'm assigned parking lot duty next to the buses, but I have an emergency situation with a student. Is there a follow-through process whereby I can have someone substitute for me and not leave the area unattended to? Okay? Because in this case, the supervision list could actually come back, as most of you well know, from a legal perspective and become a problem if the list was there but no one attended his or her assigned duty. So it's crucial that you have, and in today's day and age, with the communications technology that's available, it's almost unconscionable that you would have the inability to have a follow-through for emergency situations. I see there's, I don't know if you want me to address a question, but I see one that is, I think, relevant here because it's simply asking what is an IEP.
Go for it, Andy, yeah, definitely.
An IEP, very simply, is nothing more than an individualized education plan, which is prescribed by the Individuals with Disability Education Act, or IDA Part B, which was established and signed and reauthorized in October of 2006. That's what an IEP does. And frankly, folks, for those of you who are looking at this from the long term, it is not unreasonable to expect that within the next 10 years that virtually half to more of the students, if not all, have some form of an IEP. I think that's basically where we're headed. The third area that Dale addressed is the written and executed policies. Most school districts have written policies and procedures. The problem comes in the second part of that, a daily effective communication system. Do you have a systematic way of assuring that that written policy is just not stuck on some 3-ring binder or, in today's day and age, on somebody's hard drive, but never gets carried out to the people who need to know, the staff in general? Do they know what the expectations are when it comes to transportation, when it comes to supervision of transportation-type issues? In particular, the drivers. One of the other areas that the written policy and procedure and daily effective communications I want to address is almost every school has a daily bulletin of some sort. There's vital information on that that's crucial for drivers. That vital information is almost always included on that bulletin, has attendance type information, tardy type information. It has information regarding who signed out early. That kind of information should be shared with the drivers so that when a driver is loading for an afternoon run, he or she can pretty well do a quick head count, and before he or she departs that particular station that they're at, they can pretty well tell that Andy Demidon's not here today because he wasn't even in school to begin with, or he signed out for a doctor's appointment, or he was with the band and chorus today. It's just another way to have particular checks and balances in place. The other thing that drivers need, and it goes back to why I said at the outset, the special ed director needs to meet with and communicate with the drivers, the transportation supervisor, and principals and staff. And that essentially is, if I have a medical condition, that's for regular ed students across the board, and for special needs students, if I have particular type of behaviors, is the driver aware of what to do if I have a outburst of some sort, or if I have a shutdown of some sort? A very simple way of doing that at the beginning of the year is to provide your drivers with a 3x5 card of each and every student that's assigned to them, morning and afternoon, or midday if you have just part-time kindergartens, and that driver has some knowledge as to contact information, behaviors to be aware of in addressing misconduct on the bus. If I have a particular type of special education diagnosis that creates a violent outburst under certain types of communication with people in authority, is the driver aware of how to de-escalate those kinds of things? And if not, does he or she have a plan in place for that student to address an emergency situation very quickly and hopefully effectively? Dale, you want to pick up again?
Yep. Okay. Moving forward, gives you a lot to think about. The training issue. Now, most of you who are attorneys who represent school districts will say, well, our bus drivers have training. Well, there's training and there's training. The problem is when we look at the quality of training that is given to bus drivers across the country, To say it's poor is to be kind. The problem is that you have people who are teaching this, who are teaching it strictly coming from a transportation perspective, and ultimately what you need to be teaching drivers ultimately is emergency management, and also dealing psychologically and verbally with all types of students and how to control groups of students. This is very, very important. And by the way, all 50 states have some form of a law through their Department of Education, through their state, on a state level, requiring this. One of the things those of you who are attorneys who have litigation against school districts need to understand is that you need to be asking for the curriculum and the handouts and the testing that is being done for these drivers. Because one of the problems is, yes.
Can I just kind of chime in real quick with a quick outline of what they should be looking for? At the minimum, a typical training program for bus drivers should begin with pre-trip inspection. It should include driving in traffic, and there are all kinds of subsets here that we can provide you with later on, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to give you the headings. Intersection cautions, left and right turn supervision, pick-up discharge of pupils, railroad crossings, being passed by another vehicle, overtaking and passing another vehicle, backing up and straightening, turnaround using backing up, securing the bus at the end of the day. Very, very crucial. As Dale had suggested, if you do a Google search of bus drivers, you will see some remarkable stories where school districts have been exposed to serious liability because at the end of the day, bus drivers did not secure their bus. I will give you one of the first steps in that securing the bus, and it's a very simple one. Does the bus driver walk the entire bus, front to back, checking seats? Why do I say that? There have been multiple accounts of elementary students having fallen asleep on a bus in their seat, not visible. Drivers didn't take that minute to walk up and down the aisle, and parents made that panic phone call to the school district. And that's another thing. Is there somebody in place at the district and at the building level to channel these phone calls to when a parent says, my daughter didn't come home today or my son didn't come home today? It's a simple thing to put in place, and it can save you as a school district an extraordinary amount of aggravation. Post-trip inspection.
Absolutely.
Are there certifications in place? Certification should include each one of these. They should be documented. What also should be included in these trainings is follow-up. Some schools have gotten to the point where they've done a very good job of doing that preliminary training. The Department of Transportation, most state departments of transportation, have some very, very good material and manuals out there if you don't have something already that are for duplication purposes and are very good. Caution and caveat always is when you take something from a state or a federal agency or another school district, make sure you don't copy it in total without making the adjustments that fit your nuances. And most importantly, doggone it, make sure you read it. Why do I say that? There have been too many accounts of policies and procedures and manuals where nobody paid attention to what was written until a crisis occurred. And then it got into litigation, and things were found in that document that came from another school district. The dates had not even been changed. It was just copied in total with no thought for local justification provided for it. Now,
Andy, let me pitch in here a minute. One of the things you need to pay attention to too is that any good attorney is going to use some kind of software program. There's actually free ones available on the internet to run your manual through to find out if you plagiarized it from somewhere else. And a good attorney is going to look at that plagiarized piece that you borrowed from some school district in Oklahoma and say, how is that relevant to your school district, which is in Ohio? And it's not. And this idea of being lazy about putting together these policy manuals and borrowing from other people, templates are a bad idea. Let me say it one more time. Templates are going to get you into trouble legally, and those attorneys out there that have litigation pending against school districts, this is a key issue. When you're using a template, that means it's not a customized program. Every school system is different. Every school in every school district is different. They have different needs, geographically, student body-wise, and the thing is that if you're going to use these templates, you're literally taking dice and rolling against a wall, and it's just a matter of time before you get sued. That's the bottom line. So.
Let me go back to one of the other areas that they need to make sure of, and that Dale had touched on, is emergency procedures. First of all, are they aware of what the emergency equipment requirements are for a bus? The number of emergency reflectors to be displayed according to your particular state law. Here's another example where if you copy from one, you better make sure it matches what your own state requires. Does every bus have at least one 5-pound capacity pressurized dry chemical type fire extinguisher with a pressure gauge installed? Is it mounted properly? Is it visible and bracketed properly? For your school bus emergency drivers, do the drivers know what local district policies include for emergency procedures? For instance, if there is an emergency, should the driver leave the bus? Should he or she wait for a passerby to deliver a message? Should he or she be allowed to allow a parent who happens to come by, take their child off the bus? Are there policies that are in place that are clear there? Is the driver familiar with what oftentimes is referred to as the school bus death zone? The school bus death zone is usually when kids disembark from the bus. That distance from the front of the bus, the width of the road on both sides, and the rear of the bus, over half of the injuries and fatalities that occur in school bus situations occur in that death zone. Does the driver know what the maximum efficiencies are? Has he or she been trained? And can you, more importantly, document that they've been trained?
And Andy, let me say something. By the way, if you have buses that have the little bar that comes across, I've observed this, and some of you may have observed kids ducking underneath the bar. The bar, that technology does not solve the problem. It takes cognitive function from the driver to make sure that the zone is clear and safe. So, important.
Are bus drivers familiar with the three major factors in managing that death zone? Factor number one, motor vehicles. Factor number two, the school bus itself. And factor number three, the pupils themselves. Lastly, in an emergency situation, are the drivers aware of the policies and procedures for accident reporting? Do they know what the details they're expected to be able to put down into writing for that particular situation that occurred? And there's a whole long list of recommendations there, which again, in the interest of time, we won't go into here.
Now, let me add to what Andy said. One of my big pet peeves, and we see it when we do emergency management training at schools, is that no one understands, and when I say no one, I know that's general, but I've never seen anyone really come up with the right answers on this when we ask them when a bus or a transportation vehicle leaves the school and goes to the football game with the football team, or they go on a day trip, or they go on some type of a long-term trip by bus. One of the things that I asked them is, well, do you have a travel kit? And they said, what's a travel kit? Well, you're going to need a first aid kit that can handle major injury for at least half the people on that bus. You're going to need some kind of fluids in case people are going into shock. You're going to need blankets. There's a whole bunch of planning involved in just doing a day trip. And one of the liability issues that comes up all the time is people take off with pupils and remember the law, portal to portal, and they go to, they transport them someplace else besides their home, and they don't have any way of handling emergencies. Any way, they have no planning, for example. What if you get into an area that has no cell phone service? How are you going to call for help? Oh, we're going to use the bus radio. Well, is the bus radio a CB radio or is it a closed circuit system? All of that planning has to be a part of that. Otherwise, it opens up to liability. And one of the issues here I want you to look at, all of you in this slide, is something that Andy and I have been frustrated about. When you hire a driver by federal law says that physical ability, if it is related to their job, can absolutely be considered in the job requirement. How many times has everyone listening to this, or watching this webinar seen bus drivers who could barely get up the stairs and into their own seat? Now, what happens when that bus has an accident and fire rescue is going to be half hour away, or they're going to have a hard time getting there? It is going to be up to the adult on the bus, which is the driver, to actually help those children. Well, if the bus driver has health issues or has mobility issues, that affects their ability to do their job and to comply with that law of safety of students portal to portal. And again, this comes back to another issue, which is that drivers' jobs many times are given out as favors. And if it's all about the safety of the children, that nonsense has to stop. And those of you who are attorneys who have litigation against school districts need to look at that in discovery. Is this person brought on because they have qualifications, or were they brought on because it was a favor? This is an outrage as far as I'm concerned, and it's something that really creates liability, this health of the driver issue. Let's move on. Transportation of special needs students. Well, this is a whole complicated area, and I'm going to let Andy talk about communication, training, and routine review. But I will say one thing before Andy comments on special needs students, and he has already a little bit. One of the things that we find, we don't find it shocking anymore because it's very commonplace. You would think that special education teachers who are dealing with special needs children every day have been trained, either when they were in college or in some special training, on how to deal with special needs children during an emergency. And I will tell you right now that, and this is an accurate number, about 90 to 95%, somewhere in that range, of the special needs teachers that we meet have had no training in emergency management of special needs children. So if they've had no training, administrators have had no training, staff has had no training, and most of the time that we find, drivers have had no training in this issue. But Andy, go ahead and talk about these three issues related to special needs students.
Before I do, I need to go back and finish up what we were talking about earlier. And then it's an area that, again, in today's day and age, is absolutely unconscionable for it still to exist. Most school districts have software in place, things like Skyward, student management, parent information type software, Skyward, PowerSchool, just to name two, that allow contact with parents. And one of the areas that you can most effectively use that particular tool and prevent a problem is on those day trips that Dale was alluding to, or athletic trips, or band trips, is to be able to set up a class of students who fit that description with their contact information. And if you're fortunate enough to have been in an area where the person in charge of the field trip or the head coach or whomever has a BlackBerry type device or an iPhone or something of that sort, that person can go online, send an alert that will notify all of the parents whose children are on that field trip or athletic trip and say, we're on schedule, we're going to be back at the school at 10 o'clock. The reason I bring that up is that all too often, Dale talked about the horror stories. One of the major horror stories we see is buses returning from field trips and coaches and or teachers walking away, leaving students unattended. That's an invitation for a problem, and it's something that could be prevented. I understand why they do it. I also understand how much trouble they can get themselves into by doing it. And one of the ways to perhaps circumvent that is to utilize your student management software to send these alerts. If the bus breaks down on the way home, it's a way of notifying parents and keeping parents informed of why there's a delay. Instead of having the panic of everybody running around saying, the kids were supposed to be back at 10, it's now 11 o'clock, they're still not back, what's going on? It's a way around that particular system. Okay, transportation of special needs students. Every rule of common sense that applies to regular ed students applies to special ed students as well. The communication issue with special ed students, where we see the problem most frequently, is there's a disjointed or non-existent communication that takes place between special ed supervisors and special ed staff, regular ed staff, and principals. So you have, again, the opportunity for a major problem. Students are being transferred in and out of school districts, and in some cases, that in and out, if you're in Florida, for instance, and some of the areas around Tampa, some of the school districts down there have a student turnaround that requires them to update their student enrollments every day. But the problem is if a student comes into your school district and he or she is a behavioral problem, let's say he or she is a severely disturbed child who has violent tendencies, as that student enrolls in the school district, have there been steps taken to make sure that A, the student should be on a regular bus, B, the student shouldn't be on a regular bus and should be provided due to his or her IEP with alternate transportation, C, should an aid be considered for that student? Should there be consideration given to have student mentors with the child, depending on his or her degree of severity of problems? Expanding ridership, should there be a shorter route considered for this particular student? Have those things been taken into consideration by an IEP team in that school district before that student set foot on the bus? And when that IEP team met, has that information been sent down to the principal of the building that's responsible for the student, the teachers, and most importantly, the driver in that situation? That emergency 3x5 information card is a tremendous help to those drivers when they're faced with students of that kind of who have severe difficulty. Most importantly, is there a systematic way whereby you can review changes in this particular student's IEP and all the students who ride your buses? Do you have a system in place that allows for constant updates and the sharing of that updated information? I'm not just talking about the update took place in the transportation director's office and the special ed director's office. Do you have a way to follow through with communication and verify that that communication has been shared and signed off on?
Okay, we have a couple questions here. If you guys don't mind, do you guys want to answer some questions now?
Yeah. Let me finish up. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
And we'll hit those. Let me talk about security. Are there specific steps and procedures established that ensure safety of the students before, during, and after transit? This is something Andy was alluding to, but here's the problem. The problem is that most school staff members and administrators are not getting very good school safety training on the management of safety and security issues. It is a serious deficit. We see it all the time. And we see with school bus drivers, again, in the training they do get, when the issue comes to security and safety, you know, any kind of communication skill on a higher level, on a forensic level, is just not there. And so what happens a lot of times is drivers get very frustrated and they end up going back to base personality rather than professional interaction. And again, the bus drivers themselves are causing a lot of the liability issues that schools are seeing. So just in conclusion, as we go into answering questions, it's critically important to understand, and I hope all of you now listening to this and listening to Andy in particular realize how complicated transportation can be, and it really needs a lot more attention in many cases than it's getting. So let's answer some questions. Andy, one of the people here had said that the health condition of drivers, wouldn't that be discriminatory? But under federal law, if the health or your mobility is critical to your job, that is not discrimination. And the problem is that, you know, in an emergency situation, in the handling of children, and because of state laws that require safety of those students portal to portal, the safety rests with the school district. Ultimately, their health and their mobility issues are relevant to their job, their task. But Andy, do you want to talk about that?
Well, one of the other things that I thought you were going to get there when you were talking about state law, that in most states there is something referred to as the Child Protective Services Act. It has different variations from state to state in name, but essentially what it charges school people with is a duty to take care of the health, welfare, and moral well-being of all of its students. And if the guidance of the federal statutes that Gail was referring to suggests that your physical condition jeopardizes the health, welfare, and moral well-being of the students in that school district or in the bus that you're being asked to drive, I think you have a reasonable grounds to stand on. That doesn't mean as you well know, it doesn't mean that somebody might not challenge that. But if you have a systematic way of interviewing, screening drivers, and there's a cross-section of people who are involved in that, it makes that argument much more difficult to support.
Now, we have another question from Eleanor. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I apologize if I butchered that. We don't offer transportation at school, but sometimes we do take students on field trips. Let me talk about field trips. The bottom line is that the liability for the students themselves, and under law, that rests with the school system or the school. You hire someone to transport your students. I'm going to tell you something that Andy and I agree on, and we preach this as if it was from a pulpit. You have got to provide your own training to those drivers. You need to put together a management memorandum, which you need to go over with the drivers and with the supervisors of that company. You need to clearly define who's in charge, and who's in charge is going to be the school system, and they're going to run that transportation of those students by your standards. Because ultimately, any good attorney realizes that on a field trip, it's your planning, and there's a lot of planning that goes into a field trip. I don't care if it's a day or a week. It amazes me that no one was outraged by what happened down in the Caribbean with the young woman down in Aruba. Because here were school officials who did not do their job. They did not do any pre-planning. Students ran amok, getting drunk and high and doing whatever. The adults basically who were supposed to be on that trip as chaperones were basically getting a free ride as far as vacation is concerned, because they were certainly not monitoring those students. The students were out of sight, out of view. This kind of nonsense is just, you're begging for a lawsuit, and frankly, if you're not going to do that training of your people on how to run a proper trip, how to manage it, how to do the pre-planning, you absolutely deserve what you get legally. This kind of thing really upsets me. There's no excuse for the ad hoc way that school systems do these trips when they throw a bunch of kids into a bus, and in many cases it's a hired entity, and they have no sit down, they have no pre-planning with that driver, with the transportation person of that company, and then they're shocked when something bad happens and there's a lack of communication. Ultimately, by law, the responsibility rests with you as a school or a school district. And I'm going to tell you, it takes training, and it takes a lot of planning to do this correctly. And it's something that has to be addressed. It has to be addressed. Andy, do you want to talk about?
Yeah, I want to add to that. I thought you were going into another area that's similar to this, and that is what we often hear is, well, we don't own our own buses, and therefore it's not our problem. I beg to differ, folks. It most certainly is. If you contract with a provider for transportation services, chances are pretty good your board agenda has somewhere in it a provision that accepts that contract, and it legally binds the district and the contractor. In most cases, those contracts also call for procedures on how the bus drivers are hired. And in most instances as well, in most states, those drivers are hired through official board action. So whether you own the buses or not is not the panacea that many people feel it is. They feel that if they don't own the buses and they subcontract out for transportation, that it's not their problem. You're asking for trouble, because you most certainly do have a share in it. And most of you who are involved in litigation know you're going to go to the root and all the way up the food chain to, in a litigation liability suit to determine who has the ultimate responsibility. And since the kids are the district's responsibility and the transportation is for the kids, I would submit to you that the school district is going to be the root for almost every transportation issue that's brought to litigation.
And Andy, let me add something else to all of you listening. Bottom line is, there is only one way to do proper background checks on vendors, or anybody for that matter. You have to do a federal criminal check. All 50 states. Anything less than a 50-state criminal background check is worthless. If you just check the state you're in for this driver, and that driver lived for a year out in Nevada and committed and had a DUI out there, you're not going to catch that. And ultimately, you need to have a policy with your vendors that says this: we want a 50-state federal criminal background check to our standards, and you will provide copies of those cleared drivers to us. You must provide that to us. And then at some point you need to randomly grab those documents and have your own people check them. That's proper protection of liability by a school district. You need to understand that.
One of the other things that we've talked about several times, and the question that came up about is choosing a driver according to health conditions, wouldn't that be discriminatory? Well, one of the things that many school districts have done in recent years is part of their hiring procedures has been a medical examination.
Right.
And, you know, if you have that as part of your hiring procedure, and I think there's pretty good grounds for doing that, since you're going to be responsible for it, think about it for a moment. Perhaps one of the most difficult jobs in education. How many of you in this audience would like to be sitting at the seat, in the seat of a bus with 72 kids at your back, and the amount of supervision you have is minimal at best in terms of how often you can look through the rearview mirror to see what's going on? I mean, that's a pretty difficult job. So I would submit to you that having a medical exam as part of the hiring provisions would help with that question of discrimination, but it would also help in terms of your selection process.
Absolutely. Now, we have another question here, which I'm going to take the first question. I'm going to hand the second one to Andy. It's from Edward. This first question, boy, this one gets me fired up. Do these principles apply at the college level? Absolutely. But let's talk about the dirt and the dirty world of colleges and universities. According to the U.S. Justice Department, You are 4 times more likely to be a victim of a violent crime in a college or university than in any major city in America. If parents understood how poorly managed and how poor security is at most colleges and universities, they'd pull their kids out tomorrow. It is a nightmare, and we've been dealing with this for 20 years. One of the
and there's recently been a federal law passed that requires colleges and universities to list their crime statistics before a student enrolls.
Well, actually, let me clarify that, Andy. That law, the Clery Act, was actually passed a long time ago, but the Justice Department got so frustrated with how much lying was going on, and they used the term lying. You can go to usdoj.gov and read their review of this, that they went back to Congress and beefed it up and said basically this, I'm paraphrasing, if you're going to lie about your crime statistics at your college or university, we're going to throw you in jail. And one of the things that most people don't realize is that the president and several of the administrators of Virginia Tech, the Attorney General of Virginia is actually going to charge them with obstruction of justice in the shooting that occurred. And this is something that should have happened a long time ago. If you know the whole thing of what happened there, it's pretty frightening. And the issue of transportation in colleges, it's actually even worse than we see in K-12 schools. So absolutely this is applicable to a college and university setting. And the only thing about that is that it depends on whether it's a private school or a state school, and the laws are going to be different depending on the status of the school. But it's a big issue. It's a big issue because I'm a parent. I have 2 kids in college, and I hand them over to a university and a college to take care of them during the school day, and that's a big deal. And what I see and what I know is going on, it's bad. It's very bad. Andy, why don't you take the second one? What about students transporting other students for activities?
Well, one of the things that schools take solace in when that happens is that they wind up justifying it by saying, well, both parents signed off on it. As a rule, the safest discretionary method for you, and if it's an athletic trip, I would encourage my coaches to leave it at the coaching level and let the coaches require, we play as a team, we travel as a team, we do everything as a team, to try to encourage that particular atmosphere. I think those permission slips, it's the same thing with field trip. Those permission slip trips are nothing more than CYA. In many instances, from a litigation standpoint, they really don't carry a whole lot of weight. But I know schools do it on a regular basis. I would do everything I could to discourage, even at the end of a game, the problem comes up many times. Parents will come up and say, I want to take my son or daughter home with me now. What do I do? From our perspective, it depends on what your policies as a school district are. As a former coach and as a former teacher and as a superintendent, I did everything conceivably possible to, you go with the team, you come home with the team. And if it's an emergency date, we'll do it on a case-by-case basis, only in emergencies. And it has to be a clear emergency. And that goes back to communication. You run into trouble if you try to pull that out the night of a game. What have you done at the beginning of the year? What does your student handbook say? What does your parent handbook say? What do your transportation guidelines say? Are they coinciding with one another, or do they conflict with one another? Which, as those of you who are attorneys in the audience, you know, and as educators, that's the kiss of death, when you can find policies that conflict with one another.
But Andy, another issue is, your policies, a policy at a school district does not supersede state or federal law. And more, as Andy and I work on cases from TASA, school cases, we see policies that violate state and federal law. And right there, you're opening yourself up to liability issues.
We have a question that came in, and if there are no other questions out there, this will probably be the last question, but it touches on something you talked about a couple minutes ago. And the question is there a line where the responsibility of the school administration ends and the transportation driver or provider begins.
Andy, do you want to address that?
I will. Typically, it begins and ends for the bus pickup state point. Where is the prescribed? That's why that route selection process has to be so carefully thought through, and frankly, most of the times it's not. When that student gets dropped off at his or her designated drop-off point, there's a less of a responsibility. I don't want to say a complete drop-off of the responsibility, but that responsibility tends to wane there. The same thing holds true in the morning. And this is a problem area that I can take you in this audience. If I think we have 35 people in the audience right now. If I took you on a tour of high schools throughout this country, I guarantee you what I'm about to say, you will see prevalent every morning, which is why the supervision question becomes so crucial. Students get dropped off in the morning, and this is particularly true in urban settings. They get dropped off in the morning, there's no supervision, and you watch a trail of students walking downtown or wherever else they feel like it. Or, worse yet, going to the student parking lot, jumping into cars with students who are driving, and then taking off. Well, the drop-off at the normal designated drop-off is there, and your responsibility wanes if you have reasonable supervision at that drop-off point.
And by the way, for all of you who are attorneys, and obviously as administrators you know this, under federal law, the school district is responsible for truancy and lateness of students, and it is held against them with funding assessment under NCLB and other provisions. So this is a critical issue. But one of the things I wanted to say, Andy, was that if all of you look at the state law in your state governing transportation of school students, of schools, students in school, you'll find that the language is clearly focused and directed at the school as responsible for these under these provisions. So where is the liability of the transportation? There's always liability if you're driving the bus, if it's your vehicle, but ultimately the law is focusing in all 50 states on the school district and its responsibility. So it's critically important to look at this thing holistically with a W and see the big picture.
One of the other questions that didn't come up, and we probably don't have time to address, but I do want to mention it, is the pervasiveness in this day and age of students that no longer get dropped off at their home, but get dropped off at a daycare, okay, or get picked up at a daycare. And it presents a whole set of different sets of communication problems. If you know that's, and I guarantee in almost every school that's happening, that communication group that we just referred to, there has to be some systematic way of you dealing with the daycares that are servicing your students in your area. And make sure that, back to that, where does your responsibility end? If you have in written documentation that mom and dad have said on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, Andy gets dropped off at Little People's daycare, and you have verification from the daycare that that is so, is there a check and balance system in place that assures that that student did get dropped off Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at that particular location? And then the responsibility now gets shifted to the daycare itself.
Now, I want to say really quickly something to finish this whole webinar, and please, this is very important, and I say this to the school districts, attorneys and administrators who are listening, and obviously to the attorneys who have litigation or litigate against school districts. Listen carefully. You have got to have a proper security audit done of all of your process for security and emergency management. And it has to be a management audit. It doesn't matter how high your bushes are and how many cameras you have. It has to be done from a management perspective, and it has to be done from an education management perspective. And if you don't, that's going to open you up when you are sued to liability, because you don't even know where your problems are in your policies and in your management of those policies. And those of you who are attorneys who have litigation against school districts, you need to be looking at that and asking the question, well, I'm reading your audit here, and this audit doesn't address transportation. It doesn't address the management and the actual application of policy. So critically important that you get a clear picture, a real detailed analysis of what's working and what is not, so you can fill in all the blanks. That's the bottom line. But thank you all for listening to us today, and hopefully this helped spark some thoughts.
Just to finish up, Dale, every school district in this country uses this buzz phrase in this day and age: data-driven decision-making. When it comes to test scores, when it comes to instruction, the ultimate premise here is that we have analyzed and have assessed the issues and therefore have created a constructive package to address those issues. Yet and still, what Dale is saying, this issue of school safety and security, many schools leave unattended, which suggests an attitude of complacency, which exposes them to serious litigation and liability issues. So it behooves everyone who lives in a school district or works in a school district or represents a school district that they be engaged in developing for that particular school district an assessment of their safety and security procedures. Thanks for your attention.
Yes, thank you to everybody in the audience, but also thank you to Dale and Andy for taking the time to put together this great presentation. I thought the questions were great, as was the presentation of content. If you'd like to speak to Andy or Dale about a security issue at your school, a transportation issue at your school, or if you're working on a case that deals with this subject matter, you can call us here at TASA at 800-523-2319, and we'll put you in touch with Dale and Andy and the entire Seraph team. We will be sending out a link to the archived recording of this webinar later this afternoon. In that email, I'll include the PowerPoint presentation that was used during today's event, please feel free to keep that in your records. Our next client-focused webinar is actually going to be another school webinar with Dale and Andy. We're going to talk about the 3 high liability issues with the management of special needs students. So that's a great webinar. We sent out the invitation, I believe, to attorneys yesterday and to school administrators today. So if you did not receive that invitation, you can send me an email. My email address is mhyde@tasanet.com. I'll send that around to everybody. And if you have any follow-up questions or comments, suggestions about how we can make these webinars better, please also send me an email, and we'll take that under advisement. Again, I'd like to thank Dale and Andy. You guys did a great job yet again.
Thank you, everyone.
I'd like to thank the audience for taking an hour out of their day to spend with us. I'm going to end the meeting now. Look for an email from me in the next hour or so, and please let me know if we can provide any assistance to you. Thank you so much.
Andy, are you there?